Nature Works podcast. Conversations with extraordinary guests who are working to protect, regenerate, and better understand the natural world. With your host, Mike Weeks.
In this episode of Nature Works podcast, I'm speaking with Zach Boakes, who's the co-founder and the international volunteer coordinator for North Bali Reef Conservation. Zach's a PhD student and lives in a remote part of Bali where he's enabling communities to come to terms with, manage and also regenerate the natural ecosystems with a focus on coral reefs and restoring coral reefs using man-made structures. They're also doing incredible work with cleaning up the garbage up there and keeping the oceans cleaner and making them a better place for a whole variety of fish life. We discuss what it's like at the young, tender age of 26 to be running such an organisation, living in remote parts of the world rather than partying back in his home country of the UK, and also the meaningfulness of working with over 50 volunteers at a time coming from all over the world who come to basically find themselves to connect with the land here in Bali and, more importantly, doing their part to protect and restore and sustain the natural world. Now, if you enjoyed this episode and others, please share with like-minded folks who actually give a crap about the natural world. Nature Works podcast is, as always, free of sponsors or advertising, and our aim really is to provide honest and unbiased insights into how we can all help protect, restore and regenerate this natural world that we and our children and our children's children will rely on. So, how long have you been in Bali?
I've been in Bali. I've been coming back and forth in Bali since 2017. My family live in the UK, so I go back and forth quite a lot. But probably in total, I spent 3 years living here.
And what brought you here? Kuta? Cheap package holidays with Australians?
That was definitely an appeal. Yeah, I won't lie.
Oh, it was? Okay, all right. I thought you were going to spit on me.
I came here when I was 18 years old as like a bit of that sort of trip. Wanted to go surfing, hang out with friends, that sort of thing. I visited the north of Bali, which is now where I live. And I taught some kids how to play drums in the school there. So I wanted to give something back rather than just having a typical Bali holiday, drinking lots of bintang and kuta and surfing too much. So I did that for a little bit, for about a month, I believe. I bought a drum kit in Denpasar and took it up to the north to a school. And
every parent's nightmare, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not
sure
your child buys a drum kit, don't mention that to my kids.
I think I was quite unpopular in the village.
I bet you
the kids loved me, but the parents maybe not so much.
I can imagine.
So yeah, since then, when was that, 2017 or so? I've been coming back and forth.
So you came here as a tourist?
Basically, yeah.
You didn't come here to save the reefs?
No, that wasn't my original intention.
But you are a marine biologist.
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
I didn't ask before, but you've got your PhD or you're doing a PhD?
I'm doing my PhD right now.
Yeah. And what's that in?
Marine biology, specifically focused on coral conservation in Indonesia. So yeah, I'm halfway through my PhD now. So far, so good. It can be quite an experience doing a PhD somewhere so remote, especially in North Bali where I live. Very little Wi-Fi, phone signal.
And also lack of mentors, I would imagine.
Lack of mentors, yeah.
Because that's a big deal in doing a PhD.
It is. Yeah, it is. So it's got its pros and cons doing a PhD in Bali, and overall I definitely cannot complain, but there's certain things that make it a challenge as well.
And why are you doing a PhD? What's that for?
Why am I doing a PhD? Yeah. So I'm doing a PhD.
A lot of extra work.
It's a lot of extra work. I'm doing a PhD because I'm interested in studying the marine environment, specifically the marine environment that my project has been aiming to improve since we started in 2017. It's important for me to do research on the work that we're doing to make sure it's effective, to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so that's the first reason I'm doing a PhD. Also because I like to think that the research I'm doing is not only important on a local scale, proving that the artificial reefs and the conservation work we're doing is valuable and important, but also on an international scale as well, proving that there are solutions to restoring reefs that have been degraded in the past.
You know Steve Boakes?
Steve Boakes.
I interviewed him. He was in fact, he was the second person in this room.
Yeah, I had a phone call with him a few months ago. We had a great chat.
He's a PhD, a specialist in coral. In fact, brilliant guy.
Yeah,
brilliant.
no, we had a phone call recently.
That's who you should get to mentor you.
Yeah.
Put a word in for you if you like. We're going to be working with him on some projects in Egypt.
Yeah. No, I've set up that initial connection with him. I hope I'm talking about the right person. He's the guy that's done some of the Mars projects and stuff.
I don't. As in Mars chocolate.
Yeah.
That rings a bell, actually.
Mars do like a coral conservation project.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is the same guy.
I'm glad I'm talking about the right person.
It's the same guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're doing so your interest is in coral.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that stem from? So you came here to become a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're doing a PhD in coral.
Yeah.
Talk me through the bridge of time and space that led broad, from one to the other. How the hell did you end up where you are now?
So when I originally came to Bali, I was doing my undergraduate degree. I definitely wasn't an expert in coral conservation, but I've been studying marine biology a little bit and obviously had an interest and a passion for it. So that was my underlying goal in life, to try and do something that would protect the marine environment, although I had no idea.
How come? I mean, what's your connection to the ocean? You're from Bournemouth, aren't you?
I study in Bournemouth.
Oh, you study in Bournemouth.
I actually originally grew up near London, but spent most of my time in Cornwall from my later years.
Right.
I'm only 25 now, so quite a lot of that time spent here. But whenever I'm back in the UK, I try and spend as much time on the coast, especially in Cornwall, as I can.
But was it Jacques Cousteau movies or David Attenborough's be talking from a boat or something?
I think it was just spending as much time in the ocean as possible.
You surf?
Yeah, I'm a surfer, so I guess the passion came from surfing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that started to drive my interest in the marine environment. And after I first came to Bali in 2017, I met so in the village where I was teaching drums. The village is called Tianyar, which is in Karangasem in northeast Bali, not too far from Talumbin or Ahmed, if you know it.
Mm-hmm. I went to Ahmed to see the dolphins.
Yeah.
That was an incredible experience. We went out. There were 50 boats out.
Yeah, it's awful, right? Yeah,
awful. They chased the dolphins, and I said to the guy, "We're not being a part of this. Turn around. I'll pay you. No problem. Let's go snorkeling."
Yeah.
So we went snorkeling, and an hour later, I popped up, and he said, "Hey, they've all gone. I'll take you back." No, all the boats.
Oh, right, okay.
So we went back out,
Yeah.
and we had a pod, or multiple pods, I don't know, but hundreds of dolphins to ourselves.
Right, okay.
And by to ourselves, I mean we were literally we were cruising over the surface, holding on to these sort of trapeze bars, with dolphins swimming all around us. And it was incredible.
It's amazing, and you don't need to chase them. They come.
They
come to you
if
you leave them alone.
Yeah, we didn't chase any of them. He went round in circles, and they allowed us to be present to that. Mm-hmm. But it looked like a hunt before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is essentially a hunt, right?
Yeah.
God knows what it does to disturb their breeding.
Yeah, you cannot imagine. There is some research being done on that at the moment, and I guess this is kind of going down a different track. But yeah, there's definitely a lack of management, and
we'll get onto that. But so you went to Tianyar, isn't it?
Tianyar,
Tianyar, which I'd never heard of until I looked at your website.
Yeah, it's quite a remote village in the middle of nowhere. I
want to see it because it says it's not been touched by tourism. Yeah. And I can't imagine anywhere in Bali it's not been touched by tourism.
And that's not a lie. It really is. You never really see any tourists there.
Wow.
It's very special like that. And so I was originally there, like I said, several years ago when I was a little boy, teaching drums in a school there, and I met the founder of the local school. The school is a yayasan, so it's a foundation, it's a learning centre for kids. It's not like a government-owned school or anything like that. A local person called Ketut. And Ketut comes from a family of fishermen, and we got chatting about the marine environment, about conservation a little bit, things like that, and I discussed my interests with him. And he explained to me how the area of reef right in front of his house that he remembers as a kid being really healthy and full with life is now empty with nothing there. Not even any corals, not anything, not even any fish, because for multiple reasons this area of reef got degraded. There's a lot of reasons, and I think nobody knows exactly why. It's happened several decades ago. So
But it can't be blamed on tourism because there's no tourists.
it's not tourism.
So it's all local mismanagement.
Basically, yes. It's definitely not tourism.
Pollution as well? Or?
Yeah, so unfortunately tourism does affect a lot of reefs in Bali, but it's not the reason for the degradation of these reefs. It's a mixture of boat anchoring, coral harvesting, overfishing, using unsustainable fishing methods, things like that. Pollution as well.
Because they use some of the coral in masonry work, don't they?
That's
or
right,
stonework
yeah.
up there.
So I'm not sure how popular it is anymore, and it's definitely frowned upon in Bali and Indonesia, but it's stopped now. But what used to happen is coral would be mined, literally taken out the sea, ground into a fine paste, which is used as the calcium carbonate is used for building materials, which is obviously
You'd
awful.
actually have to change the term from mine, because mining is for an innate object, whereas coral's a living species.
Yeah, right. That's a good
Just
point.
because it has a hard shell.
Yeah.
You can't say it's a mining. It's more of it's a slaughter. So coral is slaughtered for the use of these. That's actually more inappropriate.
Yeah, so. I like that.
No mining going on.
So anyway, this one area straight out in front of Kadut's house has been destroyed. As you can imagine, what used to be a really healthy coral reef, like we have many in Bali, it's turned to an empty area void of anything, which is obviously sad from a biodiversity point of view, but also sad from a point of view of a local person, a fisherman that relies on a healthy coral reef and relies on having the ecosystem in front of them supported and healthy. So we got chatting, and one thing led to another, and we basically decided to start North Bali Reef Conservation, which is an NGO, a non-profit NGO that we founded in 2017. So actually it's coming up to our 5th birthday next month. So yeah, that's the story of how we started. We wanted to bring life back to the area that previously got destroyed. And we know that, or I know from a personal level, that the area we're working in has potential to be a healthy, biodiverse coral reef, because in other parts of the other reefs in Tianyar, in the village where we're working, there are amazing healthy reefs that haven't been degraded. They've been more protected. So from a biodiversity, from an ecological point of view, we know that we can bring life back to the area. We just had to figure out how. So
but your friend Katut is not unique but unusual in that here, what I've seen from 2 years of living here is when you talk to local people about the ecological issues. For us, mostly with our company, with NatureWorks, it's the farm, and talking about how farming using herbicides, pesticides, urea, etc., is destroying the local ecosystem, and flooding the fields also does that. And they flood the fields so that other plants and biodiversity can't come through, because rice is the only plant that really can handle the flooded, especially when the water heats up. Rice is resilient enough to handle all that. Anyway, it's a bit of an ecological disaster. There's a disconnect between our very Western view of let's save the planet, or at least let's save our little part of it, or if not I don't want to sound too cliched with save the planet. I'm over exaggerating it, but doing our best to restore. There's a big disconnect between a lot of what the locals view as important or even worth bothering with. It is very rare. I love the Balinese people more than anywhere I've ever lived in my life. But it's very rare to find people who actually, they'll admit that they've seen enormous changes, and they'll be sad about the fact that there's no fish in the ocean, there's the corals destroyed, or that the Subak streams are full of garbage, but they don't want to do anything about it. Your co-founder, what's his? Does he stand out to you as unique in the community, or is it that further into these less touristy areas where money is maybe not the same priority as it is for everyone who lives in these areas, are people more connected to the land and they're more willing and able to do something about it? What I guess the question actually is, because I'm not giving you a well-formed question, is how supportive is the community in this remote area of wanting to restore nature? Because it's not in these areas like Canggu and Chamagi, where everyone's really focused on getting their dollars out of the tourists as fast as they can, because they don't know when there's going to be another COVID, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So firstly, Pakatut is definitely unique in this way, very unique in having that ambition and that drive to take the risk and do something that nobody else has done. And these kind of projects, especially the more rural you go in Indonesia, are very unusual. It's also important for me to mention that I definitely agree with you with what you're saying about the lack of desire to protect the environment from many, not all, but a lot of local people. But I think from my experience, that comes down to lack of education. From my experience, a lot of people we're working with, once they start to understand why it's important to protect the environment, their passion is inspiring. And I have noticed that. So answering your question more directly, how supportive are the community of the work we're doing? It started with quite limited support. Actually pretty limited. We wanted to get the fishermen involved with our project because we're a conservation project, a marine conservation project, working with communities to restore reefs. But the only way we can do that is by eliminating the initial problem. There's no point doing a conservation project if the same thing is going to happen again. And this doesn't just apply to coral conservation, but it's anything. You can't set up a rhino conservation project if the locals are still killing rhinos. It's the same thing with corals. Excuse me. So from that point of view, it was really important for us to get them on board, and there's no way we could set up a conservation project without them. So when we originally had this idea, we thought, hey, we want to set up a coral conservation project, but we need to get the community on board. We had a few passionate local fishermen who were interested in the idea and thought this could be really, really good. This could be successful, but it was limited. So we had the idea to get them on board by printing everybody T-shirts with their names on. We wanted to bring together a community of fishermen and empower them to create a project. I didn't want it to be some bule, some white guy coming along and telling fishermen, hey, you can't do that, you can't do that. I'm sure you agree.
Never works.
You agree from everything you're doing here that doesn't work. And it had to be something that it's them empowered to make the change. So we printed T-shirts out for everybody with their names on and with the logos on, gave them to all the fishers in the community. Sounds like a silly idea, but it actually worked really well. T-shirts are like gold when it comes to things like this. And that started to make them think like, hey, actually I'm part of a community of people working together to restore coral reefs. And that's pretty cool. Didn't work for everybody.
God, I'm an idiot. I need to get T-shirts on all the local farmers, don't I? I'm serious, man.
It works well. It works well.
No, I get it.
Especially if you print their names on the T-shirts. That's extra cool as well.
I mean, I should have them on our three. We have 3 full-time farmers who now, irrespective of whether it's their role that day, are picking up garbage wherever they see it. And I heard a short story the other day of, so there were some kids sat along the side of the subak. For those who don't know what subak is, it's a term, we're using it as a term for the streams here that feed all of the rice paddy fields. The subak is actually the rice paddies, the pathways, the management and the water system as well. But in this case, we're talking about the streams that come into the rice paddy fields. And they're typically horror shows of plastic and garbage and diapers and everything else. We're pulling out about 50 pounds a day of plastic and garbage. And initially our 3 farmers, who I'm told now delight in coming here. They're meant to be on holiday today, but they've come into work because they prefer being here than they do at home. That's always a good sign.
Yeah, right.
But there were 3 kids sat watching them work the other day, and one of the kids was drinking a milk carton and threw it into the subak after he'd finished. This is a typical...
Which is quite standard practice.
Standard, yeah, because that's their garbage system.
Yeah.
Because they don't see it, and they're not looking at videos of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. They're not looking at videos of turtles with straws in their nose. They're not looking at videos of turtles eating plastic bags thinking it's jellyfish and so on and so on. They live in a very small world. Anyway, one of our farmers looked up and saw the kid throw it in and immediately jumped to the defense of the subak walked over, and this is not on his payroll. He doesn't have to do any of this. And this was actually, we're only in the first 3 weeks of him working here, and lectured the kids. Said, "Do you not see what we're trying to do here?
Yeah.
You should be ashamed of yourself," or something along those lines. And got the kid to get back in the water, pick it out, and then take it to one of our big garbage bags that were there. And
that's great. It's lovely for you to see things like that. Right?
And now when I go in and I observe, I'm doing my bit on the farm, and I'm observing them peripherally, so they know I'm not spying on them, but I'm curious. And also we do have cameras on the land as well. And I see them picking it up off their own volition. They're not being forced to do it. And that's all that's taken is a few weeks of sharing a vision with them. So I get that, but the t-shirt thing is genius. All of my staff are going to be in t-shirts in the next week.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
NatureWorks t-shirt with something about cleaning the subac, and then every farmer in the region can get one of these. Tell me about Tianyar, because you're saying that it's untouched by tourism. What does that actually look like in Bali? Because right here, we feel like we're just out of Canggu enough that we don't get that many people here.
Yeah, it's nice. I noticed that too when I was driving
But it is still developing now.
Yeah.
And the green belt areas that surround our home that you just saw the view, apparently that's going to be changed to yellow belt and then red belt, so they can build whatever they want on it. You can't stop progress here. But I haven't seen any of Bali pre-tourism. So I'm fascinated what it looks like and what the differences are up there.
Yeah, it's got its pros and its cons, I guess.
There's no Pepitos, is there?
There's no Pepitos.
That's a supermarket chain, by the way.
There's definitely no Pepitos. We had our first indoor market, which was built about 6 to 8 months ago. Before then, there wasn't even indoor market.
So you can get really garbage wafers.
Yeah, so it's beautiful. It's untouched. It's untouched from tourism. It's a really great place to live. However, it's not. I don't want to paint this picture that it's some sort of perfect tropical paradise as well. It's got a lot of problems in terms of waste management. There's no waste management there at all.
What do they do? Burn it and throw it in the ocean?
Basically that's correct. We've recently set up a plastic recycling centre, which is a pretty low scale at the moment. But yeah, you probably have trucks coming and taking the trash away, right?
We do, and we're assured that when we pay for the extra recycling, as we do, that it's taken away and recycled. But we've also heard horror stories that it's not, and they take the money and they throw it in the same truck, and it all gets burned or landfill. But landfill's still better than throwing it in the ocean. Yeah, it
is, and probably to a Western audience hearing that might sound quite shocking, but even from the point of view we're looking at, burning it is better than throwing it in the ocean. At least not from a health point of view. It's awful to burn trash, especially plastic. But yeah, this is how undeveloped it is. So I'm just being honest with you. I can't paint I
see it every day.
Yeah. I can't paint this as some perfect picture of this ideal tropical paradise because it's not that.
The problem is that, and I've had this conversation with Balinese people. So where our land sits, there are houses that back onto it. Showed you these earlier. Until I put the cameras up.
Yeah.
And I got approval from the houses there to put the camera up. I didn't just come in and do my suspicious booty thing. I got approval from the Subac system group, from the Banjar, which is the local kind of council, elders, spiritual leaders of the area we live in. I got agreement from everyone that it was good to put that camera up. And so all of the garbage that was going in from the houses adjacent has stopped because people know they can't do it. Although I'm told there's more garbage now being put into another section of the Subac further down.
Where there's no cameras.
Where there's no cameras. And we're going to address that in the next
Put more cameras up.
Put more cameras up. No, I mean, I think the camera piece works great for monitoring our farm.
Yeah.
But it's not a solution.
You can't put cameras up across the whole island, can you?
Yeah. But the problem is that plastic in Indonesia is so new, like 30 something years old, 40 years old in Bali. In the scale that it's at now is 15, 20 years old, where everyone's using, disposable single-use plastics. Prior to that, all of the waste that would come out of a house was fine to throw in the stream because it was just plant matter and banana leaves and rice and it's not ideal. It still ends up fermenting and rotting in the ocean, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Compared to plastic.
Compared to plastic,
Yeah.
it's not going to break down.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was typical for the average Balinese householder to just go out the back and throw all of their household waste and their shit and everything else just in the subak, and that gets filtered, and a lot of it would have gone directly into the rice paddy fields as well, but it was broken down, maybe even provided extra composting material. Now, of course, it's all plastic and it goes. So it's a behavioral change that you know, it's difficult to criticize people because they just don't get it. You're too young to know this, but in the 80s and early 90s in the UK, we had a terrible, certainly late 80s, terrible garbage problem. In the poor area of Bristol where I grew up, there was plastic in the streets and dog ends and dog shit, and it was a mess. And the government, rightly so, would that have been under Margaret Thatcher? Someone like that. John Major. They put out a huge advertising campaign shaming people for dropping garbage. And now, as a kid of about 7 or 8 years old, as I was, that all of a sudden we were policing each other, even in the school playgrounds. I remember when we got our first bins in the school playgrounds.
Yeah.
I don't know where it was going before that, but there was garbage in the school playground.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so it requires something of that level. The problem is, back then we had 4 channels. We might have only had 3, actually, BBC One, BBC Two, ITV.
Right.
ITV would have been the only commercial channel. And so people watch the ads. Nowadays, what you're going to do, everyone's watching their media across endless channels, YouTube, blah, blah, blah. You can't impose it upon people. So you're going to have to do billboards, or you're going to have to do... So it's a difficult challenge to fix, to say the least.
So it's probably, there's a good point for me to discuss this. So I've just finished a research project as part of my PhD, working with some social scientists in Bali to assess these issues and to figure out the best way to generate pro-environmental behaviours. That's what we call it. A pro-environmental behaviour is a behaviour that's going to encourage somebody to do something to care for the environment. So it's a pretty broad term, pro-environmental behaviour. It can be something as simple as turning off your light bulb, turning off your lights when you leave the room. It can be something as simple as picking up plastic on the beach. But it also goes deeper than that. It can be managing your own waste at home, or doing more even, being actively involved in coral conservation work from our point of view. So we've just finished a research project looking at this. The paper has recently just been submitted for publication, which is exciting for me because it was a long project and it took a long time.
How long did it take?
The whole thing took about a year.
Tell us the structure of the research. How do you even start that kind of paper?
So we used Tianyar, the village that I live in, as a case study, looking at how the community, we interviewed members of the community, a broad range of the community, from village leaders through to the community, through to fishermen groups, through to fish sellers in the market. Basically every different occupation that you can imagine we interviewed, through a mixture of one-to-one interviews through to focus groups, trying to get an understanding of how well projects like this can generate pro-environmental behaviours in the village, and also what encourages them to do this. So lack of education, as I mentioned, is a big thing. Education doesn't need to be formal as well. So it's important for me to mention that. It doesn't need to be kids sitting down in the classroom and being told by their teacher not to throw their plastic in the sea. It can be a lot more informal than that. It can be through one thing that we find is a very successful and important way that environmental change can be had is through social media. So we interview kids as well in the study, and most of the kids, when I say kids, they're like between the ages of 12 to 18. So I probably shouldn't use the word kids really, but you know what I mean. And one of the main ways they get information about the environment is through social media, especially Instagram. And we really do notice that these kids demonstrate much better pro-environmental behaviours than the adults in the village. So you mentioned it briefly about using phones and Instagram earlier and stuff like that. So that's a big thing, which is quite a surprise for me, and that wasn't something I was expecting to find from the research. As you mentioned here, Bali is an island of tourism. It's the hub of tourism in Indonesia, and people have, regardless of where you are on the island, people grow up kind of hoping to get a job in tourism. At least where I live, it's seen as that's the successful career if you make it in tourism. And we're in the process now of developing Tianyar as an ecotourism destination. It's very, very early stages, but it seems that the vision of an ecotourism destination is one thing that's really a really important factor in making local people want to care for the environment. So in some ways that's kind of sad, because ultimately that comes down to money, which can be an issue when there's a pandemic.
There's also a contradiction in
Yeah.
that ecotourism is actually a contradiction in itself.
Yeah.
In that you're better off not having any tourism in the area.
Yeah.
Unless that tourism influences the local behaviours, like you're saying, in
Yeah.
a way that
Yeah.
stops the local damage.
Yeah.
What you have to be careful of is that even the best intended eco-tourists aren't adding to that damage. You know, you're quadrupling the plastic load.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big issue in Bali. The amount of waste that tourists have compared to locals, specifically plastic waste.
They mostly eat, and I know this from experience, they mostly eat rice, vegetables, a little bit of fish and meat. And there's a lot of packet foods that are ingested these days, but nowhere near as much as we eat from,
the imported foods.
Imported
and
foods from the fancy supermarkets
Yeah.
and the stuff we can't exist without.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's also important to mention, that it's us that are causing an issue as well. When I say us, I mean non-Balinese or non-local people living here.
Yeah, and from what I can see at the moment, and please correct me if you know counter examples of this, is that the majority of the initiatives, this is why I mentioned your friend Katut as being, as you said, rightly so, unique. He's not unique, but he's in a very small minority. Most of the initiatives are taken by non-locals coming in, and then getting the will and the support of the locals. I think many Balinese people find it hard to initiate these kind of ideas. They don't have the same thinking processes that we do around creating something that could be a legacy, around creating something that could have maximum impact. But once you actually give them a line of sight on it, then you get brilliant people involved, and they get hugely motivated.
Hugely motivated and hugely important as well. The work that we're doing, there's absolutely no way it could have been possible without Katut and the other members of the community that we work with. It's important for me to emphasize that, because our project would not have been at all successful without it. And that's something that I highlighted from my most recent research project as well. You need local leaders and local important local people to support these projects, because without it, it's not gonna be supported by the community. Fortunately, we're lucky to have this support with our project, not just from Bakatut, but also from local village leaders, government people as well, government at a local scale, I mean. These are also important factors that are really going to make a difference in supporting environmental behaviours. So
you found that social media helps to influence the younger generation to take more care of the environment. You're looking at turning Tianyar into an ecotourist destination. Where do you even start with that? I mean, what is it going to be a specific target audience who want to come and see artificial reefs or reef restoration?
Yeah, basically that's correct. So my program, North Bali Reef Conservation, is an international volunteering program too. It's now high season in Bali, which is great, because we're utilising this high season to get a lot of volunteers who come.
High season of tourists.
High season of tourists, sorry, yeah.
Otherwise known as silly season.
Silly season, crazy season, whatever you want to call it. And it is silly and crazy, but it has its benefits as well when these tourists, in our case, international volunteers, are coming to help with our project. So we've now got accommodation for about 50 volunteers, and we're pretty full for the rest of the summer now.
Wow. Bravo.
Yeah.
And which countries are predominantly coming from?
Actually, we get a lot from England, Europe.
Yeah, they want to get out of the weather, don't they?
I think that's what it is, yeah. England, European countries, and also the States. These are the main countries. So in cases like this, I know you said ecotourism is quite controversial, but when these tourists, if you can call them that, are coming to help directly with a cause that's doing great work for the environment, it doesn't have to be for the environment, it can be a social cause too. It can be pretty broad, but when these tourists are doing great work that's clearly influencing their environment, their local environment, this is a positive thing, and it's something we've really noticed. And like I said about the importance of local people, we also couldn't do this work without the tourists that come to our program and support the work that we're doing.
What's the culture shock like for these people coming in?
Yeah, because like I said, it's not Canggu.
They're not coming into the fancy supermarkets and massage tables of Canggu. No?
Where you can't...
and cafes and restaurants everywhere.
You can't go and get a latte for 50k.
Exactly.
50k
which
is about £2.50.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
$3 or $4.
Yeah, the lattes here are almost as expensive as a decent meal. Yeah. Right? It's ridiculous. The coffee, the asymmetry in cost of coffee versus food.
Yeah.
You can sit down here. Most places you can, for 100 thou, you can get a nice meal.
Yeah.
So that's to people who don't know the rupiah conversion. That's about $7 US, £5 English. Yeah. But coffee can be $3.
Yeah.
It can be half the price of a really good meal.
Yeah.
Because none of us who've come from the West seem to complain about paying for $3 for a coffee.
Yeah, I complain about it.
Yeah, I bet, because you're out in the sticks.
Where coffee...
That's why I have a fancy coffee machine at home.
Yeah, right. I'm sure that saves you a lot of money. So the culture shock, we try and make it as comfortable as we can for the people that visit our program, but it's not fancy. There's not air conditioned rooms or anything like that. But we try and design our buildings, our huts, with airflows that allows the rooms to stay pretty cool, and they do. In terms of like culturally, it's a great place if you want to come and experience. I'm using this in inverted commas, but the real Bali. I'm doing that because somewhere like Canggu or Kuta or wherever, I think a lot of people would argue that's not that traditional.
It's like saying that Magaluf in Mallorca is traditional Spain.
Yeah, exactly, same thing really. So people like that, and they like to be able to come and experience what it's really like and get involved with the community and work with the community every day. I think it's a more wholesome and unique experience. So a lot of people come because they want to experience that as well. They want to come on holiday to Bali, but they also want to give something back and have a more meaningful experience. And generally, almost always, the response is good, and people enjoy their experience when they come and visit us.
But what are they doing?
What are they doing? Yeah.
If I'm a volunteer and I want to sign up to come and work with you.
Yeah.
Now, and before you answer that, I want to come because I want to put diving gear on, and I want to go underwater, and I want to be going over the reefs, and I want to be looking at amazing fish, and I don't want to be doing what I do almost every day, which is standing in my wellies,
picking trash out the stream.
Shit, literally, turds and diapers and plastic out of the stream, and then filtering out all the compostable with the... Should we compost that? No, I don't think we should compost that. I know it's organic, but, it's biological. Right? There's a big difference between looking like Jacques Cousteau and I can't think of somebody who would be an appropriate character for digging shit out all day.
Yeah, it's not always luxurious. We also, advertising is important. We make it clear that the volunteers know what they're doing before they come to us, and they're not staying in a 5-star resort. In terms of the activities that they do, so I'll talk to you a little bit about our program to give you some background first. So like I told you, we're trying to restore an area of reef, right? An area of reef that previously got destroyed. So on either side of this area of reef, we have 2 really healthy coral reefs, but we've got a big area right in front of where we're based that has, like I said, no life. So one of the main ways that you can restore life back in an area like this is by building artificial reefs. So artificial reefs, in our case, they're about the size of a small table, and they're made of multiple different materials depending on exactly how we want to do it.
Which materials? Tell us.
Okay,
how do we make one?
So we've got quite a broad range of materials. The main ways of making them at the moment is made from sand. Mostly sand is the main material, mixed with cement and calcium. Calcium because it allows corals to settle in the structures better.
And the cement binds it.
Mm-hmm, the cement binds it.
How long do these things last for?
In the water?
Yeah.
Indefinite. We have no exact data on it, but they last for as long as we were going to need them to last, because basically the idea of an artificial reef, it's got 2 main purposes. It's to bring life back for fish and also for corals and other benthic species. When I use the word benthic, it means species that live on the bottom, so corals, sponges, etc., etc., etc. These are the 2 aims of building the artificial reefs, and when we're building them, we want life to come back to the area using these reefs. So your question was, how long do they last for? Well, now the artificial reefs, our oldest ones anyway, 5 years old, they don't look like artificial reefs. They're not artificial reefs, really. They provide the substrate for the benthic life, for the corals to grow on. but they don't really look like artificial reefs anymore. So we're only 5 years into our project now, but in maybe 10 or 15, 20 years' time, we're not going to have what looks like an artificial reef. It will be it will be corals growing on what used to be an artificial reef, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And that's really exciting. The idea that, so you're dropping these things in.
Mm-hmm.
Do you say it's the size of a table?
Small table.
Small table.
Yeah, maybe
so
like
half size of this?
a bit smaller. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a chair would be a more appropriate.
Okay. So how many of these are you dropping in an area?
So we've now built about 9,000 of these structures.
Holy schmoly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Since we started in 2017.
And you dropped all of these in?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to get permission from anyone to drop this stuff on
we do have to get permission from the local banjad and from the head of the village.
So they approve all that?
This is all really well supported by the local government.
Because you can't do dragnet fishing when there's concrete chairs.
Yes, no, actually, this area is fishing free. It's a marine protected area, locally enforced and locally established as well. So really important that it's locally established. Yeah, it's
right?
Like I said, it's not some white guy coming along there and telling them what to do, but it's the fishermen being educated now and thinking, hey, actually, we want to restore this area. The best way to do that is by giving it its best chance possible. So no fishing is allowed.
So if I'm watching the day in the life of, or a year in the life of, one of these artificial reefs, tell me, from the moment you drop it, how do you stimulate growth onto it or activity into it? You hang out, put fish food on it or something?
So I didn't really answer your last question. So the volunteers build their artificial reefs, right? That's the main activity that volunteers get involved in. Once the artificial reefs are dry, each week we deploy them. Deployment means carrying them to the fishing boat, the fishers that we work with. We have a surveyed area each time we do a deployment, and the reefs go into the sea, into this area. So once they've been put off the boat, the next day we'll scuba dive underwater and arrange the structures. So
how many people go under?
It depends how busy we are. So at the moment, it's our high season, and we usually get maybe 20 divers.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite a lot.
So you got some safety issues to be sure of as well. Everyone dives before they come, or they do a dive course with you?
If they haven't done a dive certification, then they do it with us. But it's a prerequisite of being a diver at the program. We also have dive masters and dive instructors. So it's safety is a number one priority, and that's important, and it's always deeply considered before we do everything. But it is safe. We're not diving that deep. They're deployed between 5 to 10 meters.
Okay.
So it's not super deep diving or anything like that. So the structures are deployed with the aim of providing protective space not only for corals to grow on, but also for fish. So fish are like people. They want to live in an area that's biodiverse. I like to compare it to a city. So in a city you have very diverse buildings. You have small buildings, large buildings, etc., etc. And we try and mimic this in the way that we design our artificial reefs. So no reefs are the same. They're not just flat, boring structures like a table. They're rough. They've got unique designs. They've got as much protected space as possible using caves, tunnels, things like that.
So you get creative when designing these things.
And our volunteers enjoy this challenge of trying to create something that is unique, and we don't want any structure to be the same. So this is quite a fun activity and something that they like to get involved in. So once they've done this, the structures will get arranged underwater. So we'll scuba dive and basically place them in a formation that optimizes protective space as much as possible. So answering your other question, we don't put fish food on the structures, no. Although maybe that's not a bad idea. The fish colonize the structures really quickly. Even the next day when we dive, there's fish already coming in. There are some fish that are more specific in the habitat requirements that they need. Some that are very general and not fussy with what they want. Depends on the species, I guess, which I can talk more about later from my research. But from a coral point of view, we don't really do coral transplantation. So coral transplantation is quite a commonly used coral restoration method where you take corals from a healthy reef and you transplant them onto a reef that is not healthy and you're trying to restore. We've done a little bit and it does work, but we've found that the structures themselves naturally recruit coral. The spawning season in Tianyar is in November each year, usually on the full moon every November. So basically what happens is the corals spawn, they release their polyps into the water, and then the polyps will float, and then they will sink down and attach themselves to any hard substrate that they can. So in our case, it's the artificial reefs, and they don't just come from Tianyar. Actually, they can come from wherever, East Bali, West Bali, anywhere in Indonesia. We don't really know, to be honest, where they come from. Something that is interesting to look at from a research point of view. But the corals themselves attach themselves to the structures, and naturally over time the corals grow on the structures. It's a pretty slow process, and our oldest structures now around 5 years old. We've got coral growth up to about 10 to 15 centimeters, but they cover the structure very well, and almost 100% of the structure is covered by benthic life. So that's not just corals, but almost everything you can imagine growing in Bali can attach themselves to our structures because they're rough and designed like that.
As what you see from day one, obviously it sounds like almost immediately the fish start coming in, but where are they coming in from? Like deeper waters? Or are they just shoals of homeless fish waiting to be rehoused, like selling big issues?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a good question. Where do the fish come from? So we're surrounded by 2 natural reefs. Many of the fish move over from the natural reefs onto our artificial reef. Like I said,
Why would they do that though?
Okay, so yeah, it's a really good question, and it's quite a complicated question to answer, and we can't give you a 100% correct answer because we don't know exactly why. But the most likely answer is due to competition. So some fish are outcompeted in natural habitats and are looking for somewhere new that perhaps there would be less competition. In some cases, our artificial reefs have higher abundance of fish than the natural reefs, and this is what we found from my research, which is quite surprising and quite interesting. But it may be because the artificial reefs are actually better designed to support fish life than some corals might be, if you can say that the corals are designed.
But haven't the fish adapted to those corals over millions of years?
They have adapted, but they can change easily, or some can anyway. Some are very specific, like I said. There's certain species of fish that will only live on certain corals. And of course, these fish cannot move over to our artificial reef. Others are more general in the way that they can, and where they can live and the way they can survive, and we found generally prefer the artificial reefs to the natural reefs. I'm not trying to say the artificial reefs are better than the coral reef. There will never be a 100% replacement for them. But something we're finding is that there's some species that do prefer to colonize the artificial reef in higher numbers than they do on a natural reef, which is an interesting finding.
Ultimately, though, they're not artificial, are they, after 5 years, like you said? So what you're doing is augmenting the bottom.
Basically, the hard substrate for the corals and the other species to grow on. So yeah, that's correct. But in terms of the design and the shape, we try and build it so it's very suitable for a fish to live in, and we found that that's really worked. In general, from the research that we've done, we found that the artificial reefs are very well mimicking the natural reefs in terms of their ability to support fish life. 95% similar to the coral reefs in terms of the fish that they can support. So that's pretty good. We're very happy with those results, and it's great for us to know that the work we're doing is successful in terms of restoring the life back to the area, at least from a fish, from a mobile species point of view. Corals and other benthic species, it's a slower process, obviously. But like I said, it's definitely working, and we're seeing that these benthic life are being recruited to the area again.
So one thing I was surprised to find out about corals when I started learning more about them is that they're not actually all over the world. There's quite a limited amount of it on the planet. I assume that every country with water had coral reefs. It's just not the case.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You've got some. Indonesia is one of the has a lot of coral reefs. The Philippines has a lot of coral reef.
It's all in the Coral Triangle.
It's all in the Coral Triangle, exactly. Obviously, Australia has the Great Barrier Reef and its problems there. From a perspective of international importance, where does Bali sit in the coral hierarchy?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think Indonesia and a lot of regions, low to middle income nations in the Coral Triangle, receive much less research than perhaps somewhere like Australia or other tropical western areas. For example, in the States, in
Florida,
around there, the southern states, and places like this receive a lot more research attention than places like Indonesia, which is a shame because actually the biodiversity here is arguably higher and of equal importance from an international research point of view. So it's a shame that it receives relatively little.
Why do you think that is?
Why do I think it is? It's multiple reasons. I think that there's less money put into researching these nations. There's less focus put on researching these nations, and I think generally some of the biggest research organizations and universities that focus on these topics are based in the West, and their research stays in the West, which is a shame. I also think there's some absolutely fantastic researchers, local researchers here that I work with, but unfortunately a lot of their work doesn't get out to the international research stage, which is why it's great for me to work with them and utilize their knowledge and work together. We've created some publications already which utilizes their fantastic skills and knowledge that there's no way I would have been able to do without them. So by combining this work together, it's bringing their fantastic wealth of knowledge and putting it into international publications and putting this research onto the global peer-reviewed research stage, which for me is important, and getting this research out there to hopefully help support coral reef conservation internationally is very is one of my aims, and it's very important for me.
So when I interviewed Steve Boakes, who is he's a bit ahead of you, he's more my age, late 40s, PhD, he's lived all across Latin America, did some incredible work on bringing together fishing communities to create their no fishing zones, marine protected areas and the likes. I think my first question, I said, so Steve, and pardon the language, but how fucked are we?
Yeah.
Or it might have even been more of an imposition of, so we're fucked. Discuss. Now you're 20.
That's a hard question to answer.
Well, now you're 25 years old, right?
Yeah.
And as we did a little 10-minute tour of our farm here beforehand, and like I said to you, I'm a hugely optimistic and resilient person. I'm going to write books on resilience. In my former life, that was my speciality, is training organizations in resilience. So I can handle stuff that most people probably aren't willing to engage with. But there are still days when I've pulled out another massive bag of diapers and 50 pounds of plastic in one single little stream, or I'm going down onto the local beach and it's covered in trash and my pleasant dog walk just turns into a litter picking walk, another one. Or when I'm out surfing and I end up in a flotilla of garbage that's coming out.
Every paddle you're touching something.
You touch something. Every single, when I was in Lombok a few months ago, we paddled out and it was like my board shorts get full. You know, the pockets, because you
just get full with trash.
You can't fill your board shorts anymore because one area around you of a metre square.
Yeah.
So we got some big problems. Mm-hmm. You're 25 years old. You're clearly an activist. You're on the back of the tiger, right, and riding it. You're not just watching it from the sidelines behind bars. I'm using that metaphor. The tiger represents, the problems that we're facing here. Where do you see the greatest opportunity for making changes in this particular domain? I'm not going to ask you about carbon credits. I'm not going to ask you about, air pollution. I'm not going to ask you about overpopulation. Here, when it comes to coral and it comes to, also, we haven't touched on it yet, but we'll talk about it, plastic pollution and the likes, because I know you've got a speciality or an understanding of that. Where do you see that we can make the most impact in the next how many years?
So my work is, my experience is working on a local scale, so I cannot talk about it from a governmental point of view, but from my experience working with communities is the way forward, through education, through direct activism work, through empowering them to create change. That is, from my point of view, the way forward in terms of generating real meaningful change. So for example, like I gave the example earlier of the marine protected area, we have persuaded the fishermen to create this marine protected area, this locally enforced, locally established marine protected area, through education and through talking to them about how important it is to restore this reef. It's not, hey guys, you need to restore this reef, please create an MPA. It's, okay, let's talk about it. Let's bring on all the stakeholders' point of views and try to work with the communities as best we can to agree on the best ways that we can do this. And like I said, this has really worked. We've now restored an area of reef that is previously previously dead, previously nothing, to a reef that's basically mimicking a natural coral reef.
What's missing on it? Anything?
What's missing?
Yeah. Is anything missing?
I
like the idea that it's fully restored.
What's missing? It hasn't. I can't use the word fully restored. Like I said earlier, it's 90.
I use that. I'm not saying you did.
The research that I've done has shown it's 95% similar in the. So there's 5% species.
Yeah. What's that then?
We rarely see turtles on the artificial reef. They quite like the corals, I guess. What else is missing? There's certain fish species such as clownfish that need very specific anemones and corals to grow on. So there are some species that are missing, but we're doing a pretty good job in terms. The communities are doing a pretty good job in what they're doing, and hopefully that can inspire more similar work around the island and perhaps even internationally to see that these projects really do work. And it's not only a project that can protect the environment, but also a project that can provide livelihoods for local people as well. So now our local people are given new jobs as dive guides, as tourism workers. And I know, like I said, the word ecotourism is a bit iffy and a bit controversial, but in this case, the community have come together to restore a reef and at the same time create good jobs for themselves.
How much does it cost to build one of these reefs? I should have asked that before.
Each structure itself costs about $10.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Wow. And where do you get your funding from for the whole program?
Volunteer donations, international donations. We work with multiple different international companies that give us donations as well. But yeah, we're funded on a donation basis. Now it's the high season. We get a lot of support from international volunteers, which is how our project is sustainable. Which is why the pandemic was hard for us, because most of our funding was lost, dried up throughout the pandemic, and things got pretty slow.
So you're not getting anything from the Balinese government, or
no, we do as well. Right now we're not, but we have got great support from especially from the local government. So yeah,
they've been hurting, but my understanding of the current governor is he has his. I mean, he's ensuring that Bali by 2030 is free of all petrol engines when it comes to bikes. You know, they've raised. I think they've got a loan of about 700 million from the US to put in battery charging stations all over Bali. You know, he's progressive. He's got an eye on turning Bali into. He doesn't want the expansion of Kuta, even though that's where all the money comes in. They want to make this place somewhere to be proud of from an ecological perspective, whilst also balancing the fact that people need livelihoods. You can't have a starving, out of work population.
Of course.
Very difficult balance. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes.
It is a very, very difficult balance. Yeah.
Easy for us to do our bits.
Yeah.
Right, because we're not in control of other people's livelihoods.
Yeah.
And
it's easy to criticize. That's one thing I've seen. It's very easy to criticize when you're not in the positions of the people that have to make these decisions and compromise livelihoods and giving people food on their plates. So yeah, it's a tough one. But from my experience, these projects are getting more support and from a government level and from a local level as well. And that's a glimmer of hope in amongst all of the trash in the ocean.
It's a very pragmatic view that your position on this, which is start and in fact continue at the small community level, rather than trying to get some massive policy change put in that prevents single-use plastic, which as we know is not going to happen in a developing country. People can't afford to buy. This is one of the things I hadn't even considered before coming here. When I spoken to the people that I work with, Balinese people, and I say, instead of buying all these little packaged things that you get every day, you know, like 2 sachets of Nescafe, just buy a big glass pot, and you can't afford it.
It's unaffordable, yeah. Same with shampoo.
The shampoo. We buy it when we have the money in our back pockets. They don't have a savings account.
And that's why it's really important to emphasize, especially as some people like ourselves that are living in Bali, that have that, what's the word? That have that, I guess, upper hand, or that privilege. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
I didn't want to say it too soon because I assumed it was going to be privilege.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Because we do.
It's easy to criticize, and it's very important to put yourself in local people's positions and not jump to harsh conclusions about things like this. Yeah,
when you're raising a family and you live week to week on your wages, and you cannot, if you buy a big pot of X over here, versus those tiny little things, that it means you also can't afford to buy all this other stuff that you're budgeting so tightly on to feed your children or to make sure they're well or to give them the pencils for school that they need. Or like, we live in a different world where we can say, we'll just take our refillable copper Buddhist blessed pots to Whole Foods because they now are no longer using Whole Foods is using bamboo packaging for that $12 packet of sausages.
Yeah, exactly.
Like $12 here is what the whole family's surviving on for a day.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not there's a massive disconnect between the Western world and how we look at developing countries, and when you live in it as closely as you do, and myself here in this farming community, you start to really begin to appreciate that disconnect and the problems that it causes.
Yeah, agreed.
So I looked at your paper that
which one?
The one that was published in there's the one that had 7 points to it, which was the increased designations of official marine protected areas.
Oh yeah.
Creating a network of marine protected areas, reducing marine plastic pollution, artificial reef construction, ecotourism, Bali, increased engagement in global science, and then developing more monitoring programs. Yeah. But the one thing that stuck out for me was the socio-economic benefits of reefs. And so we've talked about, we know why it's important, right, for the ecology. We know why it's important for nature to develop these things. But if you're having a no fishing zone and these areas are protected, there is actually a benefit, isn't there, to fishermen outside of those?
There is. It's called spillover effect.
Spillover, right.
So spillover refers to exactly what you said, the indirect benefit of having a marine protected area, that basically because an area is restored, this is a protected area for the fish. Perhaps it's a nursery, or perhaps it's an area where fish congregate, but of course they leave these protected areas as well. And this is not just small research, this is internationally large-scale peer-reviewed research that has shown spillover effect really does benefit local fishers. So that highlights to me and to the international research international research community that developing these sort of marine protected areas not only has a localized benefit to the ecology, but also to the local people that depend on these species for their survival. So it really does work.
Do you eat fish?
Not really, which is a good question. I've grown up as a vegetarian, so I do not. But I don't see an issue with it if it's caught locally and it's caught sustainably. I don't agree with large scale fish trawlers that I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast now agrees with and understands. And
unless you have stocks in large scale fish.
Maybe not them.
Companies.
So from that point of view, I choose not to because I don't know where the fish is coming from. But like I said, I have no issue with eating locally sourced, sustainable fish, sustainably caught fish.
So I've been a fisherman all my life. I grew up as a kid growing up in a council estate. It's one of the few things that you can afford to go and do and get in nature. Yeah. You fishing rods and some worms and away you go. Yeah. But even as a kid, I was a vegetarian for 12 years, in fact, but it was a very violent activity. And that's coarse fishing, putting the fish back. I became a fly fisherman years later. Anytime I'd catch a trout, I'd keep it because that's an expensive fish and it tastes delicious. Yeah. But we went fishing when we first got here in the first week, my son and I, and we went out and we caught some big mackerel and everything. And, it is a violent activity. Even as you're unhooking the fish, and in the majority of cases, you drop it there in an ice bucket and you let the poor thing
bleed out.
It either bleeds out or it suffocates.
Yeah, right, okay.
I typically will put a knife straight through the skull because I think if you're going to kill it, you kill it quickly and cleanly because I'm going to eat it. But I watched the video Seaspiracy.
Right, okay.
Which you've seen.
Don't get me started.
Well, I am going to get started because I wanted to talk to you about it.
Okay.
Because I asked Steve Jobs. I didn't ask Steve Jobs anything. Steve Boakes.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear what he said about it.
Well, you can listen to the podcast. You can hear what he says about it. Yeah. But, obviously, it was a very emotive movie. It seemed to me a build up to push a vegan agenda. Now I don't mind that actually. I actually think we should all eat a lot less animals and eat a lot less fish. We eat fish maybe once a week here in my family. I actually prefer to eat oysters, and which are incredibly sustainable.
Agreed. Yeah.
And they're also one of my favorite foods. So if I had a last meal, I was on death row, I would actually have oysters as a last meal. So it's an easy one for me. I'm not all that. I don't eat tuna. I don't want the mercury in it. I don't eat fatty mackerel because I don't want the mercury in it and all the other pollutants. Anyway, I'm sort of semi-agreed with using media to create as much change as possible, even if it isn't necessarily accurate. But you can't go misleading people, right?
Yeah.
That was a very one-sided argument.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Where do you see that something like that has a place in this push that we're all working towards to make a better world, to save the environment? I mean, what was your view of it?
Yeah, so it's pretty controversial.
Amongst experts, no doubt. More than it is amongst the layman like myself.
Yeah. I guess the most important thing for me to say is that the vision and the thing that the documentary is trying to achieve, their overall aim, is good. And I support that. There's a huge issue with the unsustainability of the global fishing industry. And I don't think anybody can argue with that. So overall, I think that the documentary itself was good and it was helpful, and it definitely shed a lot of light onto the issues that perhaps the general public didn't know about. So that's important. I didn't like the way that the documentary criticised a lot of organisations that are doing great work.
It really did, didn't it?
It really did.
A lot of them at the end.
I put myself in that point of view. They could have come and picked on me and the work that we're doing. We work with fishermen, so they could have easily come and targeted us, and the organisations that they did target kind of did similar stuff to what we do. So I didn't like that, and I didn't like the way that they also criticised small-scale fishing industries as well, which from my point of view I don't have an issue with, and from my point of view can be really sustainable if it is well managed. Admittedly, sometimes it isn't, but if it is well managed, it can be sustainable. And I think that the overall message of if you eat fish, you're killing the ocean, which is kind of what they did, I don't agree with.
I think it was more that if you're eating fish, you're a bastard and you should burn in 10,000 hills.
Yeah. Go vegan or you deserve to die.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So, yeah, I kind of sit in the middle, I think, which I think probably is what a lot of marine scientists and marine experts would say. I know some people that hated it and despised it, and I know some people that are quite supportive of it as well. So I think I sit
I'm going to try and interview the guy but I've got an angle to try.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll have to watch it again. I did watch it the one time.
Yeah, I got pretty angry when I watched it and turned it off a few times, and then quite a lot of people are asking me about this, so I think I need to go back and watch it. So yeah, it's a good watch. Well, it's an interesting watch.
I won't let my kids watch it, and my kids have been around. So I've hunted wild animals, deer and goats. My kids have watched me skin those animals. They've also come out hunting with me. They've come out fishing. They've watched me kill fish and the likes. I'm not scared of showing them death. I think it's really important that they're exposed to it at a young age and understand the cycle of life. But I won't let them watch it because it's just too much of a propaganda piece. I don't want my kids at that point having such a one-sided view.
Yeah, and it is very one-sided, like you said. There's a lot of better ways to educate your kids about these issues, I think.
So it must be for you a delight, even though you're running teams of volunteers and you're taking on these big challenges. But you also have a pretty amazing, terrible description, but a very compelling, must be very satisfying work to be underwater, surrounded by nature and life on a regular basis. One of the reasons that I love this farm so much, I can lose an hour or two just looking at the new life in the pond and watching the plants coming up in areas where previously there weren't any. We've only been going 6 weeks without pesticides and herbicides, and the I don't know all the species. I've got a plant identification app. The species that are coming up, and we've got dragonflies. I've counted 3 different types of dragonflies.
Wow,
we've got
nice.
butterflies coming. This is 6 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Like nature wants to. It wants to thrive.
Yeah.
It wants to come back. It wants its rightful position as to where it was before. It just needs the chance. So I can lose myself there just on a piece of land. So, for you, I mean, what's it like every day going down to these things, these reefs, and seeing it coming back? Must be.
Yeah, I'm constantly shocked and also constantly humbled by how nature can restore and how nature does come back to an area when you give it a chance. The reefs that we've deployed now really have brought life back to an area that was previously dead. And I think that luxury of being able to go down and look at it and see the change that luxury will never wear off. That's always going to be special for me to see that. I feel lucky to be able to do this and have an opportunity to try my best to restore nature and do the best I can to bring life back. And
Yvon Chouinard, who's one of my all-time favorite business heroes.
Yeah.
I mean, when I lived in the US, I would go in Patagonia stores just because it allowed me to feel closer to nature. Right. Like I felt like I got lucky enough to actually work with Patagonia and do some coaching with them and some management leadership program with them. Yeah. And everything that you see on the front is not even as genuine and authentic as it is at the back end.
Right.
You go into their system, into their organization in Ventura. They are more than they claim they are. They're actually quite modest about what they claim to be. They, at the back end, it is all running exactly like you would want it to be, any company in the world to be running. They walk their talk. But Chouinard says, and I've read Let My People Go Surfing 3 times now. It's my manifesto for how to do business. And he says you can't protect what you don't love.
It's a book written by the...
It's so Yvon Chouinard is the founder of Patagonia.
Right? Yeah, okay.
He's a climbing bum.
Right, okay.
No, in the 1960s, he was one of the main ascensionists of El Capitan. So as a climber, he's a historical hero of mine.
Right.
But only when I became an entrepreneur and a businessman did that move from being wowed by his surfing and climbing exploits to then being wowed by his business exploits, because Patagonia has been true to this desire to create a business based on protecting the planet first. He's always put the planet over profit, and he, as he rightly points out in multiple anecdotes or cases in the book, by putting even when they put up the price of their t-shirts by 30% because they became the world's first t-shirt supplier of all organic cotton. Everyone said, this is crazy, you can't increase the price by 30%. No one's going to buy it. They sold out again and again and again. So every time they've said, don't buy this jacket, they're not trying to do some inverse psychological process. They're like, you don't need it. Right?
Yeah, right.
People, it sells out. He appeals to the conscience in people who still want nice things, and they make incredible equipment as well. By the way, I don't still work for Patagonia, so this isn't some marketing piece on there. I was getting to a point. But Yvon Chouinard in his book, and I encourage you to read it, Let My People Go Surfing. He says you can't protect what you don't love. Right. Nobody's going to care unless about putting the effort in, unless you really do feel compelled, unless you are connected to it, unless you love it. And that for me is that very simple idea is what drives me as a father, teaching my kids to love nature. And it's also what drives me with, I say this without trying to sound patronizing, but educating local farmers in better ways, because they do love their rice paddy fields. They do love their subaks. But there's this disconnect between what they love or what they care about and also seeing the problems. It's like they can't see the problems because it's too new to them.
Yes.
Or maybe it's too overwhelming to them. The point I'm getting to here is when you have all of these people coming in, you've got 50 volunteers right now, you're dealing with a lot of different characters but obviously they're all compelled to help nature. How many of these people do you think are coming to do this kind of work because they want to tick a box, They want to talk about their dinner parties. They want to put it on their CVs. And how many of them are doing it because they fucking love nature?
Good question.
What do you get a sense of from the amount of... Because 50 volunteers is a big enough case study of characters, of behaviour, of motivations.
Yeah.
To really get some insight into like the people who are being activists in this.
Yeah. I'd say it's pretty split. You get some people that really do care. They're giving up their time, incurring costs to come somewhere the other side of the world and make a real change to the environment. And it's great to see how much time as well people are willing to spend with us. We've just said goodbye to a volunteer who's been with us for 6 months. She spent 6 months of her life helping us build reefs in North Bali.
On her own dollar.
Yeah.
She's going back to get a job.
Yeah, basically actually going back to study. But so that is, it's amazing to see how genuinely motivated they are to come and help. Not everybody's like that. I think quite often the motivation is, I want to come to Bali. Bali seems like a great place to go on holiday, but I don't just want to sit in a sunbed for 2 weeks. So I want to maybe spend a week or two volunteering and the other half of my holiday
maybe they
sitting on a sunbed.
Maybe they can get their parents or businesses to pay if they come and do a week.
Yeah, I think it might be a bit like that as well. The point I'm getting at is that it's pretty split. But I mean, if that's okay though. We're not asking that everybody comes to us has to have a deep passion and knowledge of the marine environment. As long as they have a good work ethic and a desire to make a change and to make a difference, that's all we ask for, really.
Yeah, look, the reason I asked that question is because I live in a bubble of people who are so passionate about fixing these problems. All of our team at Laconic, the business that we're in, people like Grace Smith, who introduced us, they live and breathe this stuff every day where they're looking for solutions. They're looking for solutions, and they'll get their hands dirty, and they'll stand in the stream with you and pull out the dirty diapers and all the other unspeakables. But so I live in that bubble, and a lot of people in the environmental, ecological activism world live in that bubble. And then you look around at the people who really don't give a shit. I mean, I still see people now, Western people, dropping garbage in the streets in Bali.
Yeah,
and I'm like, what? And I'll always pick it up and say, you dropped something.
Yeah,
I don't care how big or tattooed they are.
That makes me 10 times angrier.
The disconnect. You know? And so we're talking, there's massive ranges, right? You've got Donald Trump and his cronies who want to drill oil and gas in Alaska and God knows where else. And you've then got the other extremes of people who think that we should all go back to just walking barefoot and not having any stuff. And then there's people like ourselves who live in the modern world. I mean, I do like Patagonia clothes, you know, I do buy things that come in plastic, even though we recycle them. I've got a 500cc motorbike that is unnecessary, but it's my passion. And I even like smoking cigars once in a while and buying quite expensive bourbon, you know, when my friends can bring it in from the US.
Yeah, right.
You know? Like I want to live in the world and also create solutions to the problems.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just trying to offload some Western privilege guilt, but I don't think so. It's more about my absolute love of nature. And so really you get real good insights with all these people that come in to see how likely it is that we're going to fix these problems. You know, there is a filtering system. The fact that these people are coming to volunteer in the first place shows they have a certain degree of compassion and compulsion. They're not the people who come here just to get pissed and drink
definitely. Agreed.
and get wild. But I'm sort of building up to a finish here. And that is, from your perspective, you've only got 25 years on the planet, but you've probably seen more people's direct interaction and involvement with the problems that we face, both locally and globally. What is your perspective on the future from your experience with the people that you are seeing day in, day out, and the solutions that you're seeing as well as the problems?
Future in terms
I want your big picture vision. So do you intend to have kids one day?
Yeah, I hope
because
so.
That's always a good signifier of whether somebody sees there's hope for the future, right?
Oh, right, yeah. The people that don't want to have kids because they don't want to bring their kids up.
Typically, I've met
me
plenty
too.
of people who don't want to have kids because they're too scared of the future. I don't take that view. I want grandchildren. Right. But I want my grandchildren to go, God, Granddad was a real activist. You know, there was a
Yeah.
time when garbage used to be thrown out into the ocean. Can you imagine?
Yeah. I share a pretty similar mindset. I find my mum always says something to me which is quite wise. She says, "Worry what you need to worry about." But I'm using that because you can only, and I said this to you earlier in our conversation too, you have to take each day as it comes. And if you think too much about all the problems in the world and trying to solve every single problem, you're not going to be able to find solutions to everything. I've seen that the solutions that we're trying to provide do work. The challenge now is getting the world to care about it and getting people to be motivated to make a change.
Do you have an idea of how to do that? Another Seaspiracy?
Do I have an idea how to do it? Okay, so from my experience, just getting people to go out there and just try something. Don't be afraid of if things don't work. I've been overwhelmed in a positive way by how great and how supportive people are of the work that we're trying to do, and how we have received help from people all around the world, and that really humbles me. And I'm sure that this isn't something magical and special that we're doing. It's just people trying to make a change, and that is well supported. And there's so many people in the world that perhaps have an idea, but they don't know where to start with it, or they don't know what to do. And I would encourage people just to get out there and try your best to make a change. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't work, because you'll have another opportunity to try something again next time. If you live in fear the whole time of trying to do something that, I don't know, that's a bit scary, or I don't think I'm going to be able to do that, then nothing's going to happen in the world. So people need to get out of their comfort zone and try their best to be the change that the world needs.
I think Yvonne Chouinard would be delighted if he said that, and probably did about 30 years ago. Zach, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Before we finish and get out of this room, which we turned the aircon off because Zach's not used to the cold, and now it's turned into an oven.
It felt like a fridge.
It was a fridge, and now I can see little beads of sweat starting to form. Hot. That might also be the strong coffee we had earlier.
Yeah.
Where can people get involved? Where can people find you? The website, etc. And do you have personal Twitter, Instagram accounts, all that sort of stuff?
I do. Yeah. Maybe I can share them with you afterwards.
Yeah.
But our organisation is North Bali Reef Conservation, which is found on Facebook and Google and Instagram. I have a Twitter page for my own research, which is Zach Boakes Research. Perhaps I can share that with you, and you can put it in the
absolutely. They'll go in the show notes.
But yeah, it's been great chatting with you. I really enjoyed this quite broad and interesting conversation.
I'm going to take you to the Subic to dig some garbage out. Right
dig some poo out and nappies out the ground.
Exactly.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks for your time, mate.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye.